There was a moment a few years ago that I never told anyone about. I was sitting alone in my car after work, having a full conversation with someone who wasn't there. I wasn't speaking out loud. The other person wasn't real. Yet somehow, the discussion felt completely genuine. Then a strange thought hit me. What if someone could hear what was happening inside my head? I remember gripping the steering wheel and wondering if something was wrong with me. At the time, I had no idea that this small habit would eventually change the way I understood myself and other people. Most of my days looked completely normal. I worked in a busy office, drove the same route home, stopped at the same coffee shop, and spent most evenings trying to unwind from work. Nothing about my life seemed unusual from the outside. But inside my mind, things were different. I was constantly talking to people who weren't there. Sometimes it was a conversation with my manager after a meeting. Sometimes it was an argument I never actually had. Other times it was a discussion with an old friend, replaying something that happened years earlier. The conversations felt automatic. I wasn't trying to create them. They just appeared. A coworker would make a comment, and hours later I'd still be mentally responding to it. Someone would disappoint me, and I'd imagine explaining exactly how I felt. Someone would praise me, and I'd replay the moment repeatedly, adding details that never happened. For years, I assumed everyone did this to the same extent. Then one afternoon, something changed. A group of coworkers were eating lunch together. The conversation drifted toward strange habits people have. One person admitted they count stairs. Another said they create fictional movie endings when they're bored. Then someone asked a simple question. Do you ever talk to people in your head? A few people laughed. One person immediately said no. Another looked confused. Someone else asked, "What do you mean?" As the discussion continued, I noticed something unexpected. Not everyone experienced it the same way. Some people occasionally imagined conversations. Others rarely did. A few seemed genuinely surprised by the idea. I sat quietly, listening. For the first time, I realized my inner conversations might not be as universal as I thought. That realization stayed with me. Over the following weeks, I started paying attention. Not trying to stop the conversations. Just observing them. And what I noticed surprised me. Most of these imaginary discussions weren't random. They appeared during specific emotional moments. After awkward interactions. After difficult decisions. After situations where I felt misunderstood. It was almost as if my mind was trying to finish something that hadn't been emotionally completed. One evening, I noticed it particularly clearly. I had received feedback from my supervisor. The feedback wasn't harsh. In fact, it was fairly reasonable. But something about it bothered me. Driving home, I found myself having an imaginary conversation with him. I was explaining my side. Defending my decisions. Correcting things I thought he misunderstood. The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes. Then suddenly I asked myself a question. Why am I still doing this? The meeting ended hours ago. The answer didn't come immediately. But the question stayed with me. Over the next few months, I became increasingly curious. Instead of focusing on the conversations themselves, I started focusing on what triggered them. A pattern slowly emerged. Whenever I felt uncertain, the conversations appeared. Whenever I doubted a decision, they appeared. Whenever I wanted approval, understanding, or closure, they appeared. It was as if my mind was creating a private rehearsal space. A place where unfinished emotions could continue speaking. The strange part was that these imaginary conversations often revealed feelings I hadn't consciously recognized. In real life, I might tell myself I wasn't upset. But inside my head, I'd spend an hour arguing with someone. Clearly, part of me was upset. In real life, I might tell myself I didn't care about someone's opinion. Yet I'd spend days mentally explaining myself to them. Clearly, part of me cared. The conversations weren't creating emotions. They were exposing them. That idea fascinated me. But the real turning point happened because of someone named Daniel. Daniel worked in another department. We weren't close friends, but we occasionally talked. He was calm, thoughtful, and seemed unusually observant. One day after work, we ended up discussing stress. The conversation somehow shifted toward overthinking. Without planning to, I mentioned my habit. "I have these conversations in my head all the time," I said. I expected him to laugh. Instead, he nodded. Then he asked a question. "Are you talking to them, or are you trying to understand them?" I remember staring at him. The question felt strangely important. At first, I answered quickly. "I'm usually explaining myself." But later that evening, I thought about what he had said. And the more I reflected, the more I realized something. The conversations weren't always about defending myself. Sometimes they were about understanding someone else's perspective. Sometimes I imagined what another person might say. How they interpreted an event. Why they reacted a certain way. Why they made a decision that frustrated me. For years, I had viewed these mental conversations as a weird personal habit. Now I was starting to see something different. They might actually be part of how I process relationships. That realization changed everything. I began paying closer attention. When I imagined conversations with people I disliked, I noticed something interesting. Eventually, I would start imagining their side too. Not because I agreed with them, but because my brain seemed determined to build a complete picture. The more complete the picture became, the less angry I felt. Not always, but often. I remember one specific example. A friend canceled plans repeatedly over several months. At first, I was irritated. Then disappointed. Then frustrated. Naturally, dozens of imaginary conversations followed. In every version, I explained why I felt hurt. But eventually another version appeared. In that version, I imagined his perspective. His workload. His family responsibilities. His stress. His exhaustion. I wasn't excusing his behavior. But for the first time, I was seeing the situation through more than one lens. And something unexpected happened. The frustration softened. Not because the facts changed. Because my perspective changed. That was when I discovered something powerful about human psychology. Many of us assume our thoughts exist to help us reach conclusions. But often, thoughts exist to help us explore possibilities. The mind doesn't always want immediate answers. Sometimes it wants understanding. Sometimes it wants emotional resolution. Sometimes it wants to test perspectives safely before acting in the real world. The conversations in my head weren't signs that I was disconnected from reality. In many cases, they were evidence that I was trying to understand reality more deeply. Of course, there was another side to this. Not all inner conversations were helpful. Some became loops. The same arguments. The same worries. The same imagined scenarios repeating endlessly. Whenever that happened, I noticed something important. The conversation wasn't moving toward understanding. It was moving toward certainty. I wanted validation. I wanted proof that I was right. I wanted reassurance. And because no real answer arrived, the conversation kept repeating. That distinction became incredibly valuable. When imaginary conversations helped me explore perspectives, I usually felt calmer afterward. When they became repetitive attempts to control uncertainty, I felt worse. Recognizing that difference changed how I related to my own thoughts. Instead of asking, "Why am I having this conversation?" I started asking, "What is this conversation trying to accomplish?" Sometimes the answer was obvious. I wanted closure. Sometimes I wanted understanding. Sometimes I wanted forgiveness. And sometimes I simply wanted to feel heard. Even if the listener existed only in my imagination. The more I understood this process, the more compassion I developed for other people. Because I realized something. Everyone is carrying conversations we never hear. A person sitting quietly across from you may be replaying a mistake from 5 years ago. Someone who seems angry may actually be arguing with themselves. Someone who appears confident may be practicing difficult conversations every night. Human behavior often makes more sense when you remember that people aren't responding only to the present moment. They're also responding to thousands of private conversations happening beneath the surface. And those unseen conversations shape decisions, relationships, assumptions, and perceptions far more than most people realize. Today, I still talk to people in my head. Probably more often than I'd admit. The difference is that I no longer view it as something strange. Instead, I treat it like information. A signal. A clue. If someone keeps appearing in my thoughts, I ask why. If a conversation keeps repeating, I ask what remains unresolved. If I'm mentally defending myself, I ask what fear is hiding underneath. And surprisingly, those questions often reveal more than the conversations themselves. Psychology taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier. The goal isn't to eliminate every thought. The goal is to understand what the thought is trying to tell you. Because beneath most inner conversations lies something deeper. A need to understand. A need to connect. A need to make sense of experiences that don't fit neatly into simple explanations. Looking back, I no longer wonder whether something was wrong with me. I wonder how many people silently believe they're alone in experiences that are actually deeply human. Maybe that's why these conversations matter. Not because they're imaginary, but because the emotions behind them are real. And sometimes the most important discussion you'll ever have isn't with another person. It's with the version of yourself that's still trying to understand what happened, what it meant, and who you're becoming because of it. So here's a question worth considering. The next time you find yourself talking to someone in your head, are you trying to win an argument, or are you trying to understand something you haven't fully seen yet?